They didn't push you away. You followed them as they pulled back. Every time they gave less, you gave more. Less attention. You reached out. Less effort. You tried harder. Less presence. You stayed closer. You thought you were fixing it. You were making it easier for them to leave, because distance creates tension, and tension creates value. But you removed the distance. You made yourself constant, predictable, certain. And once someone feels, they don't have to earn you anymore, they stop trying. So no, you didn't lose them at the end. You lost position the moment you moved closer, when they were already stepping back. Today, you're going to understand why every time someone pulled back, you moving closer didn't fix it. It made it worse. And the problem isn't them pulling away, it's how you responded to it. If you want to stop repeating this pattern without realizing it, subscribe now, because once you see this clearly, you won't react the same way again. They pulled back, not suddenly, not in a way that forced a reaction, just enough for you to notice, but not enough for you to leave. Less effort, less attention, less presence, and you felt it. You didn't need proof. You saw the change in behavior, but instead of stepping back, you moved closer. You texted more. You tried harder. You became more available, not because you didn't see it, because you didn't want to accept what it meant. And that's where the pattern starts. When someone pulls back and you respond by closing the distance, it feels right. It feels like you're protecting something, like you're fixing what's slipping. But behavior doesn't work like that. Pulling back is information. It shows a shift in interest, a shift in effort, a shift in priority. And when that happens, your response defines everything. You can create distance, or you can remove it completely. You chose to remove it. You stayed close, consistent, available. And that changes how you're seen. Because value isn't built through effort alone. It's built through position. And position depends on tension, on uncertainty, on the possibility of losing you. You removed that. You made yourself certain. And certainty removes urgency. No urgency, no effort, no effort, no investment. That's how it begins. Not with a breakup, not with a clear ending, but with a shift in behavior and a response that makes it worse. You didn't create the distance, but you removed the tension that could have stopped it. And once that tension is gone, something else takes its place. And that's where the real problem starts. You felt the shift immediately, not later, not when it was obvious. At the beginning, when the tone changed, when the effort dropped, when things stopped feeling natural, you didn't need someone to explain it. You saw it in the behavior. Less initiative, less engagement, less consistency. And that kind of change doesn't happen randomly. It signals a shift in interest. But instead of reading it as information, you treated it like something to fix. That's where the mistake starts. Because your reaction wasn't neutral, it was immediate. You moved closer. You tried to bring things back to what they were. More messages, more availability, more attention. Not because it made sense, because it felt like the right thing to do. If something is slipping, you hold tighter. That's the instinct. But instinct doesn't always produce the right outcome. In this case, it accelerates the problem. Because when someone pulls back and you close the distance, you remove all tension from the situation. You eliminate the space where effort could return. Instead of creating uncertainty, you create certainty. And certainty changes perception. From their side, there's no risk, no pressure, no need to re-engage. Because no matter how they behave, you're still there, responding, reaching out, maintaining contact. That becomes the new reality. And behavior adapts to that reality. They don't need to step up. They don't need to match your effort. They don't even need to explain anything, because your reaction already solved the problem for them. You filled the gap, and once the gap is filled, there's no reason to close it. That's cause and consequence. They pull back. You compensate. The imbalance grows, and the more it grows, the harder it becomes to reverse. Because now, it's not a moment anymore. It's a pattern. You always respond the same way. They always receive the same outcome. And patterns create expectations. They expect you to stay close. They expect you to reach out. They expect you to accept less. And expectation removes effort. Why invest when the result is already guaranteed? That's the logic behind it. Not emotional, behavioral. You didn't just react once, you repeated the reaction. And repetition teaches people how to treat you. That's the real mistake. Not feeling the shift, but responding to it in a way that makes it permanent. And once that response becomes consistent, something else starts happening. Because it's not just about your reaction, it's about what your reaction creates. And that leads to the next part. Once you move closer, the dynamic changed. Not emotionally, structurally. Because distance isn't just space, it creates tension. And tension is what keeps effort alive. When there's a gap, there's something to close, something to fix, something to recover. That's where effort comes from. But you removed the gap. You stayed close, consistent, available, predictable. And that changes how you're perceived. Because when something is always there, it stops being pursued. Not because it's not valuable, because it no longer requires action. That's how behavior works. People respond to what demands effort and ignore what's already secured. You made yourself secured. No matter what they did, you stayed. No matter how they acted, you remained available. So from their side, nothing needed to be earned. No need to improve behavior. No need to increase effort. No need to re-engage. Because the outcome was already guaranteed. You would still be there. And once that becomes clear, value shifts. Not instantly, gradually. Less urgency, less priority, less attention. Because urgency depends on risk. And there was no risk anymore. You removed it. You made yourself constant. And constant presence, without consequence, turns into background. You stop being chosen. You start being assumed. That's a critical difference. Being chosen requires effort. Being assumed requires nothing. And when someone moves from choosing you to assuming you'll stay, their behavior changes. They invest less. They think less. They prioritize you less. Not because they made a conscious decision, because the situation allows it. That's the mechanism. You didn't lose value because you weren't enough. You lost value because you removed tension. You removed the need for them to act. And without that need, there's no movement, no correction, no return. And once value drops in that way, effort doesn't bring it back. Closeness doesn't restore it. Trying harder doesn't fix it. Because the problem isn't lack of effort, it's lack of structure. You changed the structure, and the behavior followed. So while you believed staying close would help, it did the opposite. It made distance unnecessary. And when distance becomes unnecessary, effort disappears with it. That's when the imbalance becomes visible. Because now it's not just about value, it's about who is investing and who is not. And that leads directly to the next phase. At this stage, the pattern is already set. They reduce, you compensate. They give less, you give more. Not once, repeatedly, and repetition creates imbalance. Because now effort is no longer mutual, it's one-sided. They stop initiating. You start initiating more. They take longer to respond. You respond faster. They invest less energy. You increase yours. That shift changes everything because effort is supposed to match. When it doesn't, one side becomes the source, the other becomes the receiver. And once someone gets used to receiving without matching, they don't correct it. They adjust to it. That's the key. They're not actively deciding to give less. They're reacting to what's already happening. You're filling the space. You're maintaining the connection. So from their side, there's no need to step in, no need to lead, no need to balance anything. Because the imbalance works in their favor. They get attention, they get consistency, they get presence. Without having to invest at the same level, that becomes the new structure. And structures define behavior, not intentions, not words. Behavior follows what's easiest, and what's easiest is receiving without giving. So they lean into that. Less effort becomes normal. Less communication becomes acceptable. Less involvement becomes enough. Because you continue anyway. That's the pattern. You increase input, they decrease output. And the gap between those two keeps growing until it becomes obvious. But by then, it's already established. You're the one sustaining it. They're the one benefiting from it. And reversing that dynamic is difficult because now you're not just reacting. You're maintaining a system where your effort replaces theirs. And systems don't change on their own. They continue as long as they're supported. You kept supporting it. Every message sent first, every attempt to reconnect, every effort to fix what was slipping. All of it reinforced the same structure, and reinforcement creates expectation. They expect you to reach out. They expect you to stay. They expect you to accept the imbalance. And expectation removes responsibility. Why change when nothing requires it? That's the logic behind it, not emotional, structural. You created a dynamic where effort was optional for them and mandatory for you. And once that dynamic is in place, something else happens. Because behavior doesn't just stay reduced, it evolves, it adapts further. And that's where the next part begins. At this point, it's no longer a reaction, it's conditioning. Because behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. And you rewarded low effort. Every time they gave less, and you stayed, you confirmed it was enough, not once, consistently. And consistency turns behavior into habit. They didn't have to guess how to treat you. You showed them. Less attention, no consequence. Less effort, no consequence. Less involvement, still no consequence. So that becomes the standard. Not what they say, not what they promise. What actually happens. And what actually happens is what gets reinforced. You didn't need to explain anything. Your actions made it clear. You can do less, and I'll still be here. That's the message. And once that message is established, behavior adapts around it. They don't increase effort, they optimize around minimum effort, because that's what works. That's what's accepted. That's what's been proven. You proved it, not intentionally, but repeatedly. And repetition removes doubt. There's no uncertainty anymore. No need to test boundaries. The boundaries are already defined. and they're low. That's the problem. Because once someone adjusts to low expectation, raising it later doesn't work. You can't suddenly demand effort when you've been accepting less. You can't create consequence after showing there isn't any. The structure is already built, and structures resist change, not because the person is unwilling, but because the pattern is stable. It works. For them, they get what they want without giving more. So why would they change? That's the real question. Not emotional, functional. People don't change behavior that benefits them. They continue it until something forces a shift, and nothing forced a shift here. Because you stayed. You stayed through the drop in effort. You stayed through the imbalance. You stayed through the disconnect. So the behavior remained. And over time, it didn't just remain. It became the baseline. Low effort wasn't temporary. It became normal. And once something becomes normal, it's no longer questioned. It's expected. And that expectation shapes everything that follows. Because now it's not just about doing less. It's about no longer needing to do more. And that leads to the final phase, where the disconnect is already complete, even before anything ends. By the time it looks like it's ending, it's already over. Not officially, not verbally, but behaviorally, because disconnection doesn't start at the end. It starts much earlier, when effort drops, when attention fades, when presence becomes optional. And all of that already happened, step by step, quietly, without a clear moment you could point to. That's why most people miss it. They wait for a clear break, a conversation, a decision, a visible ending. But that's not how it works. The break happens before the exit. Mentally, first, they stop thinking about you the same way. Emotionally, next, they stop feeling engaged. And behavior follows both. Less initiative, less priority, less involvement. And by the time it reaches behavior, the decision is already made. They just haven't acted on it fully. That's why they don't leave immediately. Because leaving is the final step, not the first. They stay physically, while already disconnected internally, and you stay too, but for a different reason. They stay because they've reduced investment. You stay because you're trying to recover it. Two different positions, same space. That's the illusion. It looks like you're still together, but the dynamic is already broken. One side is present, the other is maintaining distance, and that distance keeps growing, not suddenly, gradually, until it becomes impossible to ignore. And that's when most people say, it ended. No, it didn't end there. That's just when you finally recognized it. The real ending happened earlier, when behavior changed and nothing was done about it, when effort dropped and it was accepted, when connection weakened and it wasn't challenged. That's where it ended. Everything after that was just time passing, time where you stayed, time where they stayed, but not in the same way. And that's the difference, because once disconnection reaches that point, there's nothing left to rebuild inside the same structure. The position is gone, the dynamic is set, the behavior is stable, and what remains is just the final step, which is leaving. But by then, it's already happened. And that's what most people don't understand. They focus on the moment someone leaves, but ignore the entire process that led to it. And if you don't understand that process, you'll miss it again. Because next time, it won't look the same, but it will follow the same pattern. And that's where the real decision comes in. They didn't leave first. They disconnected first. You just stayed through it. That's the pattern. So next time you see it happening, are you reacting the same way or changing your position earlier? Comment, control. Like the video and subscribe.